Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but I actually gave you the name of someone else.
Oh, good.
Who, like, the week before, they were like, oh, is your company hiring?
Okay, great.
So thank you.
No, that's great.
Whoa.
We're all here.
Hail, hail.
Hey, Elizabeth, greetings.
Greetings.
Been-
How are you?
I'm okay.
You
Still
look
here.
tan.
I've been working on it. I've definitely been
You look
working on it.
tan.
Yes.
My doctor tells me I shouldn't work on that anymore, so I'm impressed. You're still
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I can't
My
help myself.
dermatologist ordered me not to work on it anymore.
Same. I'm impressed. Yours is like, no, you go. My
Yeah.
daughter walked in the other day to the dermatologist and she was so tan, and the doctor was like, that's bold walking in here this tan. It was
Yeah.
Well,
right.
I can't help myself. It's like I'm not a smoker, but it's the equivalent of like giving up smoking, right?
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, they've told me to give up coffee, and that's definitely
Oh,
not.
come
Oh,
on.
that's not a smart thing to say.
Yeah.
Hey.
All right. Well, I'm excited to talk. I saw your list of questions. Daniel, you and I have talked about this stuff a lot. Anyway, so, but it's nice to
just
see
to-
you. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the context of this is the scan that we're doing for RWJF, which is kind of a step in that direction of trying to do this consent utility. And so we wanted to obviously get your perspective on the actual stuff you're doing in California, to be able to incorporate that in terms of the thinking around stuff. So so thanks for making the time to do that. And then we can talk about separately, sort of how that fits into some of the other stuff we're doing and the stuff we've been talking about both for California and nationally. But let's focus on the interview and the kind of questions, and then we can sort of morph that into the next pieces, if that's okay.
Yeah, I was hoping, as you know, San Diego would kind of engage, but anyway, we can talk more about why. Anyway, there's a lot going on.
Would you finish that sentence?
It's really hard right now in California, at least for the schools that I work with, school districts, and even the state, frankly, but no one wants to focus on sort of like the broader solution for the better good. It's all about, how do I solve my problem right now, this minute, with the funding that I have and the issues that I'm facing and the interest of the governor and the state board and the state superintendent in, integrating care into the school. So the schools are just frenzied and sort of micro focused, right, on their solution. And unless something's going to solve their immediate problem or challenge, they're not likely to engage right now.
So just a quick question. Did you mean San Diego or did you mean Sacramento?
I meant Sacramento, but I'm finding it, it's true everywhere right now, because there's this, well, not only, it's not just the practical challenges that they're facing and their interest in serving children and families more efficiently and all of that. It's the funding streams that they're getting are tied to certain work, and that
Yeah,
work is
yeah.
tied to getting an outcome done now, not in a year or 2 years or whatever. And so it's just an interesting time right now, really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, in breaking barriers, we've always had, as Daniel knows, like counties engaging in integrated care efforts, you know, without any fun, like they're just doing the work for the greater good with us. We sort of have a proof of concept here, at least in our work, that people want to be doing this work. But now there's this, and they'll take the time to do it, and they'll pay to find out how to do it better and all of that. But now there's this urgency to making it real, and there's funding attached to that. And so everyone's in this flurry over how to build the solution as quickly as they can.
Why now, and what are the I want to let me back up for a sec. So I given what you just told us, and given that you're not all the questions that we sent you, it's the same set of questions every interviewee, so that it's apples and apples, right? But that doesn't mean that each one has sort of the same context. They
Right.
absolutely don't, and you certainly don't for all of the questions. So what I thought, and I'm going to get to the question in a moment. So what I thought was we could start with what are the question about barriers. What are the barriers, and how do we get over them? Because you're talking about a pretty huge one right now. So can you talk just a minute about why the schools are where they are, and why the funding at this moment seems to be focused so I don't know if narrowly is the right word, but so specifically, and then segue into how do you deal with situations like that? Does it simply mean that, well, we can't do it? Hopefully it doesn't mean that. And so we could think a little bit out loud about how do you deal with situations like this when you encounter them, because a lot of people are going to encounter them.
Yeah. It doesn't mean no one's going to do it. It actually means people are expediting trying to find their own local solution. Why more now than ever in California is because COVID, well, there are a couple factors here, right? But COVID certainly brought a recognition that we need to serve the whole child in ways that, you know, we hadn't really, I mean, we had it, some of us had embraced that, but I don't think that the entire system had embraced it in the ways that we have now. And so, and then concurrent with that is a funding. We've got, you know, I'd have to go look at my charts, but we've got billions of dollars of funding right now in California attached to school-based health services, as well as community schools development, as well as system of care development, as well as Medi-Cal maximization development. So when I just take those 4 buckets, everyone is trying to figure out, and early care actually and aftercare are both really integration efforts. So everyone's trying to figure out how to do this work concretely at their local level, because what they're seeing in policy and in allocations of funding is an effort to build integrated, you know, care for school, with schools as a hub, at least for parts of that service delivery system, if not large parts of that service delivery system. So that sort of policy push, along with the funding allocations, is creating this interest and urgency at the local level, as well as the need to sort of wrap ourselves around these kids and families right now at the local level to realize a solution. So many of the counties are tackling the issue of how do I share information, you know, with particularly like the behavioral health system or the public health system, social services and probation and education. And they want to find that local solution for themselves, because they don't all sit in the same place. And so when we start to talk about, you know, doing it nationally, or, you know, unless that's going to solve their problem as efficiently and effectively as it can right now, they're less likely to sort of have that conversation because they feel like they need to focus on their own local solution.
So how do we, okay, which leads us to, does that mean that we just say, well, interoperability across counties, across systems, it's got to wait?
Right. It's such a great question because I, as Daniel knows, I share your mindset that like, why aren't we creating a bigger system solution versus creating all these local solutions? Not to mention, like, I don't think that that's the most effective utilization of state resources. And so it's this interesting, I'm having the same debate in Breaking Barriers now. I don't think that means that we don't try to create a community of learning and practice around this and an expert sort of learning exchange with the people that are tackling this. But I also, concurrent with that, I think what I'm seeing counties and districts need is referrals to people who can tackle their immediate interest in development, but then maybe that agency or organization or whatever, those people then are also feeding into the bigger, broader questions that you all are asking and that we're trying to solve for, if that makes sense, so that the local gets solved, but then there's this collective learning going on regarding the bigger picture.
So I want to suggest a complementary with any approach, or ask you whether it makes sense, I guess. And that is, should we be focusing on ways that the broader approach, if you will, and I think we all know what we're talking about generally, are there ways that we can pitch and execute the broader approach as a means for them to accelerate their local efforts? I mean, if they see it in their interests that, right? I mean, what they want to do is solve their local problem. If we can frame this and shape it, I guess, in a way that says to them, this is all about solving your local problem, but in a way that maybe you haven't thought of because you've been too narrowly focused.
Yeah, I think that in order to engage them right now, at least here, the best way to do that would be to say, look, when they say like, what does this bring to me? Like, what am I getting involved in that's going to be helpful to me at the local level? I think the answer has to be, you would have direct technical assistance to solve your problem, and you'd have access to experts who are able to do that as quickly as possible. And we have those connections. And not only that, those experts that we have access to have already done this work. So, they're ahead of the game. They're ahead of any other, consultant you're going to bring in to try and solve this challenge for you. Without that, I think they're much more likely to just say, oh, I'm going to go hire, whoever to solve this for me. There are a couple of players. Have you guys connected with, like, I don't even know what they're doing these days, but there was a company here called ETR. Have you ever connected with them? ETR. So ETR didn't solve for the consent issues that you're, trying to solve for. But what they did do is they became a pretty big player in California. I think they're a big player nationally. And I know one of the guys that works there really well. I've just lost track of him in the past couple of years, but I know he's still out there doing their work. Anyway, they got really involved some years ago with school-based health development on the data side of the house. So they became a contracted provider for a number of school districts in order to capture the data that the districts were gathering related to health services for the kids that they were serving. So all of the documents that the districts were generating for service delivery were going into the ETR data system. And then that system had the capacity to interface with the local health. Like for instance, like in one of my clients' districts, it was the hospital was bringing fellows onto the campus. And so this whole conversation came up about, well, how are we going to share between the hospital system and the ETR system that we've developed that's internal regarding the records that we're collecting for children, the amount of service they're receiving, the outcomes on the service they're receiving. And they could do these pie charts of like what we were seeing, what were the health issues, how much of, depression were we serving, how much anxiety, how much other stuff. And so then we got into, well, how does the hospital interface with this? And they started to tackle how to do that sort of crosswalk between the different providers, assuming we had consent to share, which we did for all these kids, because I built the consent to share forms. And those were just written forms that I know that's your next question, like how did that work? Well, that was all written forms that we handed to the families, and upon consent for treatment was consent for information sharing. And then that got fed, that consent document got fed into the district's system so that we had a record of it. But it wasn't an electronic consent application. So ETR became kind of a big, and I don't know where they are now, but kind of a big player in like capturing all this data array, the health services that we were offering kids. And so they're a provider in California that I could easily see a county office calling and being like, well, we really need to share data across systems. And there's another company called Opeka that is gaining a fair amount of traction. And then I just heard about one more the other day. I'll have to pull up the name. I might be able to pull it up while I'm on the phone with you, but another one the other day that sort of touts itself as, an organization that the districts can, and the other agencies can put all their documents into so that everyone can see everything. But then there's all these privacy settings. So only certain people can see certain information, which is exactly what ETR did, which is exactly what the public schools do anyway, because the superintendents and the principals and the teachers all see different stuff depending upon the privacy setting that we have in the system. So those kind of players are becoming highly sought after right now, because that's what the clients are trying to solve for.
So I want to keep going on this just for another minute or two. So the best way, backing up, we generically need to show all these people that it's in their self-interest to think broader as well as to solve their own individual issues. Do they know, it isn't just, I don't think, who is the consultant. Do they know that they would benefit in furthering their own goals if they had data information from other domains, from other systems? Do they fully understand that, or do they think they can lick their local problem by staying local?
When you say other domains, are you talking about across the nation? Are you talking about other sectors? Are you talking about?
Yes, sectors. We use, a lot of vernacular, but yeah, other sectors. Are they talking to each other? Those schools would benefit from knowing that the kid is homeless. The people who are, just the cross-sector information exchange across all the multiple sectors that we always talk about, whether they're courts or whether they're
they know that. They know that.
So they fully get it, but they're just too focused. So what I'm getting at is there an education component to get them really believing that we're only going to accomplish part of our mission if we don't use this time of great resources to build systems that permit us to really make this difference in a longer haul?
I think what they understand is that they need probation's data and social services data and homeless data and health data and all that. They all know that. I mean, that's like everyone's finally sort of got that. But I think maybe what they don't see is that beyond the local data sharing within their own county, that they're trying to solve for, that there's a benefit to sort of understanding what other people are doing, whether it's other county. I mean, if someone said to them, look, here's this technology and it solves for this, and you should get on board. And oh, by the way, not only would you be able to share your own data in this collective, but you'd be able to see if that kid moved from here to wherever, Contra Costa County and then back to Sacramento County or San Diego, whatever, that, you would be able to see like the trajectory of that child across the different agencies. Then I think they would say, oh, well, that would be better. But if the application or whatever the technology isn't fully built out yet, then I think they're just thinking, okay, I need to figure out, like Sacramento was saying, Chris was like, look, I just need to figure out not only how to get the consent, but how to share this information and have these computers, I guess, talk to each other so that we can get this information now.
Adam, let me ask a question.
Yeah,
here,
go.
Because I think that, and Brian's on the call. Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you met Brian. Brian is the lead particularly on the technology side of what we're doing here on the consent.
Hi, Brian. And let me just qualify, I'm not a data technology person.
Right.
I'm just like on the ground, help them try and figure out what they're trying to figure out. And then data and technology people are the ones that are trying to make that a reality for them.
Right. So I was supremely surprised when he said, oh, we're going to build that out this year. We're going to have an integrated interoperable system within a year, starting from scratch. It seemed unbelievable.
Who said that?
Our colleagues in Sacramento. What was his name? Chris.
Chris.
Yeah, he's like, I can't wait for you guys. I got to do it myself. Okay, maybe he's got a solution that he's going to plop in there and do that. But the point that that I wanted to make, or at least ask a question around, was on the consent part, because that's a really difficult issue, as you well know better than anybody. And unless you're just going to replicate sort of an analog, sign the paper, have somebody input the paper into a data warehouse or something, you're not solving the problem, right? You're meeting the need, but you're not actually making it useful longer term, and revoking consent and expanding consent to those kinds of things. And I guess the question is, what's in it for me, is the idea of being able to build with other people that consent utility, so they'd be able to adopt it and learn along the way, as opposed to having to create it from scratch. And I wonder if that's enough of a what's in it for me, that would break through, particularly on that consent piece, because if people are driven by sort of immediacy of dollars and policy, I can see how they just can't wait for anybody else. But that particular piece would be useful everywhere, even though they may not share a lot of data about kids across counties. We still have to address this really gnarly issue of, getting the consent, securing the consent, warehousing the consent, revoking the consent, doing all those data tagging, all the data around those kinds of things. I don't know how you do that by yourself, basically.
Well, it's interesting. Did you ever connect with Claire Cunningham in San Mateo?
I'm trying to remember if I did.
Okay, so Claire.
He might have been part of one of the calls. Yeah.
Claire is I think she's currently the acting county counsel for the county of San Mateo. But early on in Breaking Barriers, she came and presented, I know I told you about their universal consent that they had developed across agencies. She went to Georgetown, got trained in their whole intergovernmental stuff, came back. San Mateo paid for this years ago. And it was like probation, education, social services, health, or at least county behavioral health, MHP, I think. Anyway, they created this universal consent form that was a technological application, and anyone could go into it, whether that child walked through whatever door, and they would go in and they would say, okay, we want consent to share with our team, our system of care team. And it would self-populate with California law regarding the information that could be shared. And then they would check boxes, and then they would get this universal consent that all the agencies could see. And that was like 5 years ago that she presented on that. And the last time I checked in with her was a couple of years ago. And I asked how it was going. And I think she said, we're just having a hard time getting traction for utilization by everyone, like getting everyone on the same page to utilize this technology and consent form that we had created. And I don't know where they've all landed now. I do represent and talk to San Mateo County Office of Ed regularly. And they've said, yeah, that never sort of became something that we used consistently across all of the school districts in the county. So I remain curious about what they built, because they took the money and time to build it, and it was a technological application. I thought it sounded fascinating, and sort of where that sits in California. But to give you an example of like what our clients want to hear is, oh, San Mateo built a universal consent technology that you might be able to jump into, or you might be able to replicate. So, talk to them.
Right. And that would expedite people's processes, because
And then that expedites, that's right. That expedite. We're a world of replication, right? Or we're a world of adoption of something that's already been solved for.
Right.
I think if we were saying we're putting together a collective of experts on consent, universal consent, technological universal consent application in California, not New York, not Philadelphia, not, but in California, you might get a group of people that are like, yeah, we all have to solve for this and we want to do it together. But I think once we start talking about other states and other laws and I think people are just anxious to get it done here, and they know that the law is specific to every state.
One quick thing that may wind up, maybe it's tangential, but maybe not. Is one possible way of getting people on board here, and it's probably not just in California, is to say to them that what you're building could be a model? Is ego sufficient to get some people on board? I'm serious, if they think they're doing something so great, might they be interested in participating because they can show off how great they are?
I love that question, because I say that children and families in California can't get what they need when they need it, not because that's not what we're concentrating on. We're concentrating on ourselves and our egos and our legacies. That is certainly a major, I would argue, actually, it's certainly a major factor, and it's also a barrier. Yes, yes, except I think when that when we're looking at that factor for humanity in our work, they're looking at, okay, yeah, that's right. I want to be the one that built the thing that solves for the problem. And I want to do that as effectively and efficiently and quickly as possible. And having conversations about what New York might be doing isn't gonna do that. So yeah, I think that's a major factor. If people knew that, in fact, this has come up a couple times in my conversations, Daniel, about your work. If people knew that those connections that they build in this collaborative could further not only their national recognition, but also their connection to the federal government and like the policy at the federal level and resources at the federal level and grants and things of that nature, then that definitely is a hook. The other thing, Daniel, that's interesting to me is the reason why I found out about you in the first place was our children, our families work in San Francisco, that. And that was like a micro project. Like that was like a, right? I was like a document I looked at and I was like, who the heck wrote this thing? So I've always thought of you and your work, particularly as having the capacity to do that local, like problem solving and solution building, as well as being connected to the bigger picture. And I think that has very real power.
Yeah. No, I think you're right there. Before we lose the track of Claire, thank you for that, by the way. I think that's kind of exactly what we're trying to do, connect the local to the, the larger county, state, and federal policy. Is there a way, and how do we find Claire and how do we find out what they actually did? Because maybe there's something that, whatever whatever, didn't get wrong day, bad coffee, whatever, somebody felt.
Or maybe they're using it more now and I don't know. Like, I have no idea where they've landed. I haven't been
Yeah.
able to keep track. So I can email her and see if I can't get her connected to her again and connect her to you directly, because
Okay.
you should have a conversation about what they did there.
What's her last name?
Cunningham,
I don't remember if she was, and she's in San Mateo, right?
San Mateo County Council. She was deputy county council when I met her, but I think she's actually the county's county council now.
Yeah, I don't know if she was part of the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust work or not, because they
Oh,
were trying to
yeah,
do that.
that could be.
I know her name. I don't remember if it was just in passing or not. But
Well,
just,
I've
just to-
definitely mentioned her to you too and sent lists with her name on it, so that could be it, but I have no idea. She
Okay.
might have been involved in that.
so just one point, and then we'll get back to the other interview questions because we want to make sure we're capturing this. So we actually have a call with the Office of National Coordinator next Wednesday with a pretty broad group of people who are representing various initiatives from around the country. So we've been looking at San Diego, we've been looking at Michigan, and all of these other groups that are working on consent to actually propose to the ONC that they actually support this project and to create the replicable model, starting in the couple of the sites in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, the integrated care for kids sites. But that's why I was wanting to get Sacramento and to actually get a California county, because as Ryan can describe, the solution in California ought to look like New York. It's just got the rules. It's just got the rules for
That's right.
California. So it can be ubiquitous in that regard. So that addresses the issue of national recognition, because it looks like all the roads are pointing in that direction, that there's interest, there's motivation, there's subject matter experts. And so if Claire and the work that they're doing actually has made some progress, we want to be able to sort of fold that into the solution. It maybe, it could move us farther, faster ahead and make it more accessible, more broadly with national recognition, with funding and stuff like that, and applicable. So that would be really
like
useful.
if there's funding, or like, for instance, I think when people hear that, like, you're working with New York and New Jersey, because they obviously got a grant to do this work, and so that's funded, and they're thinking, okay, well, we have funding, but we're going to use it to hire the people who can get this done most expeditiously, and they're not part of that national grant right now.
Daniel,
Yeah, so
wasn't there a county, was it San Mateo, that was interested in serving as a site for our proof of concept?
Well, that's the conversations we were having around Sacramento. And then I think we may have took it too far from the ground for them. I think they got freaked out about the broader applications, and as Elizabeth said, they were super focused on,
No, I
building
get
up-
it. I hear
building
that.
up their something now. So, and I don't think we've gone, and then when we talked to Santa Clara, they were super interested,
Clara.
but they were like, well, our plate is full. We can't deal with anything else right now. And, so I think it's a matter of, and especially in California, there's so many initiatives happening. You mentioned already several of them, Elizabeth. I think counties are probably just overrun with demands and resources and overlapping kinds of things. So one more thing is maybe not that attractive to them.
Hey, Brian, you have done some good investigation about the intersections with education, right? Do you have any questions you want to pose?
I'm going to turn off my camera because I have to charge my phone or it's going to die, but I'm listening. So
Okay, great.
go ahead.
Brian, anything?
Actually, the biggest concern that we have had within New Jersey is the plethora of different student information systems, therefore different technologies that we might need to integrate with. The lack of, or the spotty support for interoperability standards by the educational system vendors, and for that matter, just the kind of organizational resistance to exchanging information based on the concern that any exchange of information might violate FERPA. And we're hoping that, of course, in the absence of there being a strong culture of information exchange, and therefore the lack of any kind of consent services that might be used to instill some trust in the fact that if the information is exchanged, the consent concerns will be taken seriously. We're kind of hoping that by putting in place some kind of common consent utility that can be used between, for instance, healthcare and human services and education, that will help to change the culture a little bit. But I've just dumped a whole bunch of different interrelated issues at your feet. Do you have any advice on how we sort through these issues and potentially improve our ability to for the Inc. sites to collect what is a very modest set of information, educational information on children in the schools?
So I do training on HIPAA and FERPA with Rebecca Gudeman, who's at the National Center for Youth Law. And most of the time, the barriers, Ray, HIPAA or FERPA, because it happens depending upon which player I'm dealing with, from a legal perspective, are red herrings. Like we can't share is where they start. And that's actually not accurate. From a legal perspective, it's not accurate. They can share, particularly if they have consent to exchange information. And sometimes I think that we can't share is just used as, I don't want to say an excuse, but it makes it simpler. If that's the answer, then we're going to go through the process of figuring out how to make this happen. I think the easiest way to do that is, at least in the work that I do, is to get the agencies on the same page about, in a collective, about their collective goals to serve the children and families, and then have a very concrete conversation about exactly what date that an agreement that there is an interest in data exchange, which I haven't worked with anyone who doesn't have an interest in data exchange. And then an understanding of the law and the fact that the law is not an absolute barrier to sharing. In fact, it encourages the sharing of information in many different statutes here in California. And then defining exactly what it is they're going to share, and then figuring out how we're going to make that happen. And sort of that process, once we have agreement that they want to share, that process becomes, it becomes possible. I've done it numerous times with clients who are in partnerships with different health or probation or social services players for kids in their school district or in the county.
I certainly know that saying no from a school system's perspective costs less than saying yes. And one of the things that I think that New Jersey is attempting to do is to dangle a carrot by pointing out that schools can get Medicaid money to support the students that are being served by these Inc. programs, which are largely very high risk Medicaid child beneficiaries, I guess, patients. By letting the schools know that by participating in this entire program, it opens up the opportunity for the school systems to make a bit of money by providing some services at the school level, rather than forcing the kids to have to go to some other building somewhere elsewhere in town or elsewhere in the county in order to get the same services that they would need to improve their lot in life.
Well, especially here, I don't know if this like movement is exploding in the ways it is in California. I just heard that California made the single biggest community schools investment this year than has ever been made, like in, I don't know if it's decades or what, but the whole community schools allocation here is an effort to utilize schools as a means to integrate care and wrap multiple agencies and services and community partners around children and families. And so if the schools understand that additional resources, to your point, yes, some of it is billing against EPSDT entitlements and otherwise, which is also a massive body of work here in California right now. But if they understand that additional resources are going to come to the table to assist them. So for instance, when I was working with the hospitals and the fellows that were coming onto campuses to help support the staff to provide services to these children and families, that became a very concrete additional support system that they could utilize to serve the children and families. And so then there's this incentive to figure out how to share information and how to coordinate and collaborate, because it's going to make it easier for educators to educate as opposed to be trying to do like all things to all children with all these agencies who they aren't coordinated with. So
yeah,
that is definitely, that I would say that when I'm talking to, education, I'm saying, look, I'm not a proponent of you bearing the responsibility of, being all things to all kids without the resources to do so. And in order to get those resources to you, coordination, collaboration, integration is necessary, not so that you can take it all on, but so that the agencies that are tasked with providing these other entitlements to children and these other support systems are there doing it to make your job, easier and to allow you to do what you're supposed to be doing, which is educate.
So I have a direct consent question. If we came up with a really snazzy, wonderful, universal consent model approach technology, would they buy it? I mean, are things so narrowly focused that even a good solution might not make it through the haze?
It's interesting. I think about Apple. I think about I'll just give you a really wild, you'll get a sense from my mind, but Daniel already knows that I'm a little bit out there, but Game Changer is an application that my son, who plays travel baseball, utilizes. And Game Changer is this technology that I don't know who started that just took off like wildfire, where, teams, youth baseball teams can go into it and we can put in the parents put in data, rate the game, and then all the stats come up and all the kids can see all their stats and all the coaches can see their stats. And then they just innovated to say, oh, well, we can, if you guys get a camera, you can film all the children's baseball games as well. Well, that was an even greater incentive for people to jump in. And it was already baked solution for all of these different youth sports teams across the nation, because I just came back from Colorado tournament where all the teams were utilizing Game Changer from all over the nation. And I thought to myself, now that's an application that was baked enough when they launched it that everyone just jumped in, because it did make it easier for all of us to do what these youth teams wanted to do. And I know that's off point, but I feel like that's what I've been thinking about this, which is, if someone has something that is, gonna make it easier for the clients to solve for the problem they're trying to solve for, and they can just jump in and adopt it, then I think that that's what they would do. And that's what I'm seeing happen with these analyses of companies like Opeka that's saying they can put all the documents together in one place. Oh, and I think that they're also saying that they can do, Daniel, this brings me all the way back to the first time I ever saw you present. They can do AI analysis on these documents and like gather information about these kids that we wouldn't otherwise have across the domains. Ray their behavior and their needs and all of that. So yes, long answer to your question. I think
Well-
if someone had a solution.
So the reason I asked, and then I'll turn it over to Daniel et al. For anything else before we have to wrap. But the reason I asked is you had, I think earlier you said you had data sharing agreements that you came up with. They presumably included some element of consent in them. And then Claire Cunningham had a universal form in San Mateo that presumably worked to some extent and dealt with consent, and they had something. And all of these efforts with their now, money pouring in their doors, trying to solve their local problems, presumably they understand that consent is a big part of the game. And so they're working on it at some level in some way. And I don't know if they may all be different. Some may be too narrow. I don't know. But that's what raises the question in my mind of whether, even whether the better mousetrap is going to get utilized by a bunch of people building their own mousetraps.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, if in California, people knew that someone had tackled consent for information sharing in one place that they could just dive into that embedded the laws here, like it sounds like San Mateo did, but again, I would need to know more about where they are now. But yeah, I think that people would be, and then they could upload the documents that they wanted to upload to share into that with privacy settings baked in. I think that is an technological application that people are looking for. The work I've been doing is not technological. It's paper,
Right. That's the difference.
Downloaded.
That's the difference. Yeah.
But San Mateo did a technology app that people could all go into and utilize it and see each other's stuff. And that's what I don't know. But yes, I think that's what everyone's sort of looking for. And what I'm gathering is what they're trying to solve for is not having to upload all the documents into a new system, but having the computers speak to each other that already exists. Like what you were just saying, Brian, is the challenge here. I mean, Sacramento can tell you they've got 6 different information systems and they want those to talk to each other.
Daniel, Brian?
No more questions for me.
Well, there was a question you raised before, Brian, in terms of the school information systems. And I'm wondering, Elizabeth, whether or not, across the state, people are just using, whatever they want, basically. There's a diversity of whatever, Power Schools and Genesis and what are the other ones? Or is there a standard that anyone set on?
There are a couple of different technologies that the schools are using to capture the documents, but there aren't that many. I mean, we could do a pretty quick summary, I think, of what they are.
Elizabeth?
You were talking about where we keep our information. Oh, no?
I think, like in terms of the school districts, keeping their information, but then also reporting that information, whether or not it's the state or utilizing it in some way to, report out their outcomes, state out or the local outcomes, and then at some point even being able to use it, internally for absenteeism, readiness assessments, those kinds of things, and whether or not those are any kind of standard. Because I know in New Jersey, I think there's Brian, there's 6 different systems that are these in like 2 counties are using 6 different systems, and every school district gets to choose their own.
You mean just within education?
Yeah.
Well, we have our state system that we have to put information in for purposes of additional documents.
Okay.
There are only a couple that I know of in California that people are utilizing. But if you're talking about school health records and the sharing of school health records, it's probably more diverse. I'm talking about like attendance records and, you
Right.
know, grades and transcripts and things of that nature. But if I then jump into wellness records, health records, I think there are a couple of players like this ETR company that have jumped in that clients have utilized because they want those records to be separate from the rest of the
Yeah.
whole.
Well,
Sorry.
actually, the records that we're talking about here are student information records. They're basically, it's just 3 pieces of information so far, maybe 4 if we add in the latest. But it's chronic absenteeism, kindergarten readiness, or 3rd grade reading level. Rare that you'd have both of those for the same individual. And lately they've been talking about needing access to individual education plans. So it's a relatively small set of data, and it is education specific data. The reason it is of interest to the healthcare provider driving this INC program is that chronic absenteeism can be a leading indicator to healthcare problems like chronic asthma or family problems like parents that have a substance use disorder. And that gives them a clue that something's not right here. Let's see if we can find out what that is so that we can address the health issue.
Attendance was used as a proxy for health in San Francisco. Ken Epstein, Daniel, who you know, I think, he was the Children's Behavioral Health Director in San Francisco, and they created a agreement between children's behavioral health and education to share attendance data as a proxy for sort of health and the need for behavioral health services. So they did this whole contract between them that they could share that data, and then they figured out how to share it. He could tell you how, but I understand your point. It's actually completely parallel here. Everyone's using those indicators as proxies for health. I have my concerns about that being enough, to be honest, but let's just start there. Education in California is housing those in, you know, not, I don't think that if we did a study, I don't think it's that many places. And I think the IEPs that you're talking about, that gets really tricky regarding sharing IEPs. I'm a special ed lawyer too. There's a whole another issue there. There's a lot of information in those IEPs. So the question would become, what are you sharing in the IEP? Not the whole IEP necessarily, like parts of it, and that would be a longer conversation, but I get why they would want it.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm good. A few minutes shy. The one thing that I'll ask of you, Elizabeth, if you have the bandwidth, we are writing, I don't remember what of this you know or don't know, but under the grant that we got from Robert Wood Johnson for this smallish project, we're going to write a report, and we're not just writing it to our WJF, to say, here's what we did. We're writing it as a sort of white paper / issues brief saying, here's the lay of the land. And we wanted to do some good for the field, right? For our work, for other people's work, and see if, there's some nuggets that we can share. So if you don't mind, I can send you a link to it's a working document on, it's not a Google Doc, it's on SharePoint. But it's a working document into which a lot of people are feeding, their thoughts, their questions. The best thing we can ask of anybody is, if you have 3 or 4 paragraphs you think belong in this report, type up the 3 or 4 paragraphs, and we will assimilate all of that. Now, we will input content from this interview as well, obviously. But but I could send that link to you, and if you saw a place where you had thoughts, writing that you wanted to contribute, you could do that directly.
Let me
Go ahead, Daniel.
I was going to say, maybe make it a little more specific. I know that one of the things that we've talked about is Elizabeth is incredibly generous, over generous with her pro bono time. And So I would probably, sort of modify that request a little bit, which is, Elizabeth, there's two other attorneys involved with this work.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think you've met both of them before, Jennifer Bernstein and Chris Beltrani, who are at the Network for Public Health Law. And they're actually both sort of contributing to the sort of the legal sort of aspects of this scan. And I would characterize it as a scan that the foundation is supporting, not really report to them so much.
Right. Right. Sure.
Yeah, so it's really meant for general consumption about, hey, what's going on out there that we need to know, and trying to characterize both the opportunities, the successes, the challenges, technology in some areas. And that might be a place where, and you've already contributed, the work that you and Rebecca did on the HIPAA FERPA stuff, but it might be a place to sort of highlight, especially from a California perspective, the most sort of either egregious challenges or the most, things that would potentially pop out that because of your, close contact with this topic, to get your voice in there to represent it.
Yeah, and lessons learned is really bottom line for most people, right? If you've learned something, and there's zero pressure here. I mean, this is wonderful of you, and we will incorporate this. But if there are 3 paragraphs, 6 paragraphs of this, it would be really helpful for people to know X. That would be great. And as Daniel said, we do have other lawyers. 2 of them, the ones Daniel referenced, are co-leads of our legal team on this project. And Brian on this call is the co-lead of the technical team. So, if there's something there, great. If not, thank you for what you've given us.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And just sort of just send me what Daniel, you think you want me to really look at. And I'm happy to send any thoughts. I mean, I think one is interesting, at least in California, aspect to this is the law really does contemplate a sharing of information. And so, at least particularly as it relates to our dependency and delinquency population, but, we have to have a means by which to do this. And so a technological application that we could all be utilizing, I think the state knows would be the most effective way to do that. So I have a couple of thoughts. So
Okay,
I'm
great.
happy to look at anything.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, I need to jump to 2:00. So thank you immensely for this. Really helpful. And
And if
I
you
said
have
yes.
Elizabeth, if you have 2 minutes, I can explain the ONC piece if you want to. I can give you a quick heads up on that if you got a minute. Otherwise, I can kind of.
Yeah, I do. I have a couple minutes. I had to jump in my car in my multitasking life.
Sure.
But yes, I absolutely have a couple minutes.
Okay.
Great.
So anybody who needs to jump is fine. I just wanted to bring her up to speed or you up to speed rather, on what we're doing here. So in addition to the scan.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye, Adam.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
So the scan is sort of a quick view of what's happening with consent around the country in places that are meaningful or have made meaningful progress. That's why San Diego has contributed. There's a couple of places, New York and Maryland, and a couple other places that have actually been doing some work in this area that we think might be important, but also transferable. And so the scan is kind of giving a picture of what are the standards out there, what are the solutions, what are the challenges, those kinds of things, who's making progress, what can we learn from, just to get a lay of the land. Because what we're ultimately trying to do is to create this proof of concept that will be implemented, sort of designed and implemented for some sites, as I said previously, including New York and New Jersey and potentially Connecticut, to actually build it out, or build the requirements, the design of it, and then to test it in those communities. See if you could actually create something that is sort of multi-purpose across HIPAA, FERPA, 42 CFR, other areas as well. So that's the conversation we're having now. As I said, there's a bunch of folks who are working on the consent and a bunch of people working on this sort of this solution, this open source solution. And that's the conversation we're having next week with the Office of the National Coordinator at the national level. The whole issue, as you know, around consent is, that solves a lot of the problems if we can get through that, right? And if everybody doesn't have to create it themselves, maybe there's a replicable model. So there's a fair chance that ONC will come to the table. Our hope is to say, this makes sense. You've got an amazing representative group of of subject matter experts, people involved already with federal initiatives, some of the technical things. We want to support this effort, especially as it applies to specific jurisdictions. And there's more and more interest from the feds of actually supporting sort of shovel-ready projects, right? Stuff that can actually get done, probably politically motivated over the next couple of years. But so that group is forming. And as I mentioned, Jennifer and Chris are sort of participating as the, sort of the legal part of it. And that's the place I wanted to share with you and maybe Rebecca is as that moves forward, to join in that work, because there'll be a lot of need to sort of flesh that out, apply it to individual states and understand the details, particularly FERPA, which I think neither of them are as expert as you and Rebecca are on that particular, and the having actually accomplished sharing at some levels. So that's the context that I wanted to make sure you were aware of as we're talking to other counties, or as you're thinking about and encountering other places yourself, how you might be able to get involved, not on a pro bono basis, right? But actually generating revenue to do that to support that effort.
Yeah, I think both Rebecca and I, we've talked a lot about collaborating more. We helped the School-Based Health Alliance, California School-Based Health Alliance, build a tool for technological, just basically it's like a website, but to take HIPAA and FERPA are training online so that districts could go there and search answers to questions and whatnot. So I think both of us would be interested in helping take that further to a direct application for consent for California. So yeah, I mean, if it, if that comes to, I firmly believe that this work should be funded at a state and a national level. I'm stunned at, well, it's been a long haul, but I'm stunned at how little the state and others are willing to fund sort of the interoperability work that needs to happen. It's shocking to me, but
totally.
Maybe that's shifting.
I don't know. The other piece is Mike Wilkening is now working with at the federal government.
Oh, he is?
He's working within the secretary's office. So in terms of Bashir's office, so we're in contact about trying to sort of bring that federal help to bringing the agencies together and creating something that states could use in our lifetime here. So yeah. I thought you'd be interested in hearing that as well.
That'd be great. I'm, as you know, I'm all in for this happening.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, well, keep me posted on that as it evolves. If you need my help with anything, I'll be happy to help.
Yeah. I just was looking at Claire, and she was on our list for one of the events that we held, I think in California at least. If not one of the national events, we invited her to. Yeah.
Claire?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So, like I said, I haven't touched base with her in a couple of years, but she definitely, it's funny. She walked into the Breaking Barriers convening, 5 years ago with a binder as thick as anyone has ever seen. And it was all the California law on information sharing.
Well, I appreciate it if you reach out to her and if she's interested, make a sort of a virtual connection, and maybe we can repurpose or extend or learn from what she's actually done. That would be super.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing about the work that she was tackling, which Rebecca and I have also been really involved in too, but
Mhm.
is it's not just the health education sharing, it's the probation, social services, education
Yeah.
sharing as well. And those are totally different like bodies of law. HIPAA doesn't
Yeah.
even necessarily come into play unless we have health, health records that we're trying to share. So
One quick final question on probation. Sharing probation information, does that also require, is that a different kind of consent, or is it a unique consent, or is it, how does that work?
well, there's a whole like set of codes
Yeah.
related to the sharing that education can do with probation and social services. So some of it requires consent because it isn't called for within the law. And some of it is a mandatory sharing of information. So it depends on what we're talking about.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that.
Yep.
Good.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks.
so much. I wish I had more time to give, but
Me too.
I don't.
Me too.
Sadly.
Okay, well, we'll catch up
Don't
with
we
you
all?
soon.
Okay, bye.
I know. Thanks. Bye.